we are going to learn how to make different forms out of clay to turn into our stamp bodies. You need 7 spheres of clay that we are going to start with that are roughly the same size. This is a little bit smaller than a ping pong ball. And the first one is just making a sphere. And the reason that we are making the sphere is because in your stamp body, once they are leather hard, you can create different designs in it, which we will sketch out. And then in softer clay, you can use these to make different patterns, textures, designs. We cannot press these into the clay effectively until they are bisque fired. So that's why these are a different color. They have gone through being bone dry and then fired the first time, and they become bisqueware. So making a sphere, and we are letting this get a little more firm by placing it in our bag, but not letting it totally dry out because it will become bone dry. We want to keep it leather hard, so when at the end of class we'll wrap it up like this so it doesn't dry out. So that first one is the sphere. The second one that we are making is a disc. So to make a disc, you can take your sphere of clay and you can flatten it out a little bit on the table. You want to make sure that the thickness of your sphere doesn't get too thin, basically, because you need to be able to have a solid enough amount of clay that you can do designs on, like these bisqueware stamps that are sphere shape, and this has an additional piece on it. Try to smooth out the sides, making it to where it's easier for you to put a design on it at the end. But notice that I'm kind of keeping this a little bit thicker. If you want it to go thinner, you can. You just don't want to make it so thin that it will break. So this one is the disc, to show examples of an effective disc design. You want the pattern to be thick enough with how you carve into the clay that you can see the negative versus the positive space that's removed. So that is the disc. And again, we'll let it get bone dry on another day before we can bisque fire it. The third one that we're making is a cylinder. So taking one of your spheres of clay, and you can just light pressure roll it on the table. Notice that when I'm rolling it, it kind of rolls on its own too. You don't want to hear that thump, thump, thump sound, because that means you're pressing too hard and you're getting it kind of uneven. You may have to stop every once in a while and kind of paddle it to where it's more rounded. When you're making this sphere, sometimes the end may loop over itself. You can kind of flatten it too, because with the cylinder, you want to be able to potentially use all sides of it. But if you're rolling it and you still cannot get that to flatten out, and you don't want that to potentially be an air pocket, you can take our fettling knife and you can slice off wherever it has that clay that's kind of looped over itself. Then flatten the ends. You can make this more narrow too, but you want to try to keep it as smooth as possible to start with. So smoothing out any edges. If it's drying out too much, you can take some of your sponge water, kind of smooth it, but you don't want a bunch of cracks or rough areas. You want a nice surface area that you can create your designs on. So some examples of designs that are carved into a cylinder stamp. Again, you can use the edges of these too. When we're making these stamps, the deeper that you make the grooves in the stamp, the easier it's going to be to see those when they're smashed in the clay. I had to press pretty hard to get this to come out. So this one probably could have been carved a little bit deeper. On this one, pressing kind of hard again to be able to get it to come out. But you can also use the opposite end. So if I trimmed or cut this in some way, I could make this into a stamp design or a shape on the ends of the cylinder. So that is our third one, is the cylinder. The next one is a cone. So to create the cone shape, start with your sphere of clay, and if you angle your hand to kind of press down more on one side, it's naturally going to flatten out a little bit and leave the other edge rounded. Leaving it kind of rounded makes it easier to do some designs to where it'll project out more, but you could also flatten it some like this and keep those edges to where they press back. Also on the opposite end of the cone, you can flatten that out a little bit because we could do a smaller design inside of this surface area too. So these are some good examples of cones. You can also take the cone once we're finished and we can shape it. So this one is more like a triangle. And then this one, the person cut out the edges to kind of mimic the zigzag lines that are inside of this lightning bolt. And then testing out the effectiveness of these stamps on soft clay. Have this one, so that presses pretty well. This one that has a spiral repeated design can look like this. And then the lightning bolt one, press in. So the lightning bolt itself works pretty well, but these designs on the sides, I would have to kind of roll it or something. It doesn't show up as well on the edges. So that is the cone. Then our last one is a cube. So to make a cube, start with your sphere of clay and just kind of paddle on all the edges so that it flattens out. And you can continue working on that to get the edges a little more precise. And it's just a matter of how consistent you tap those sides to get it to be more even. So the edges don't have to be super crisp on this either. This just gives you 6 different sides that you could have designs into. So with the cube, we have this one that has a variety of patterns and textures on each side. This one is more rectangular, but still has where you could hold it on this side. Could have utilized more areas of the surface area to create a design, but it's still good as long as you have one good solid design. This one still though, I had to press pretty hard to be able to get that design to come out. And on this one, some of these sides are more effective than the others. That one's not showing up because the grooves are not deep enough to create that negative space. So that's something you'll have to experiment with in working on making your stamps, is making them to where there is enough negative space carved out of it that you don't have to press extremely hard to get that stamp to press through soft clay. This one hardly shows up. Those lines are not deep enough and wide enough to create that clean texture. So you should, by the end of class, have a cube, a cylinder, a sphere, a disc, and a cone, with our end goal of making stamps once they are bone dry and then bisque fired. Here's a stamp that's inside of a cylinder shape. So we can experiment with making our, oh, I didn't show you this, how the sphere, did I already do that one? I don't even know that I pressed that in. So with the sphere, when we make different designs into these sphere shapes we can roll around. I'm already forgetting if I did this. If I already did this, then here's a second look at it, which you could press it individually or you could roll it around. So the sphere creates a repeated but irregular pattern that can come out in the